And drivers, I've got attorney Peyton in. She is back on the program with us to talk about this. And again, if you got a question for him, again, it's 8888 Road Dog. And Peyton, I want to welcome you back, sir. How are you?
Pretty good, sir. How about yourself?
Oh, doing well. Thank you for joining us here on the program. There's a lot of moving parts to this story. We're going to break this down state by state, but let's kind of set this up for the drivers out there who may not be familiar with this story. In general terms, this Department of Labor policy has got some big implications for the trucking industry. Owner operators with multiple trucks may be especially hard hit with this. What's going on with that?
Well, Mark, over the last 5 years, we've seen an unprecedented growth of government. Two of the entities that have expanded the fastest have been the IRS, so the Taxation Authority, and then the Department of Labor. And what we've seen is a concentrated effort to kind of redefine one, your tax base, but then two, through the Department of Labor, reallocate and realign how businesses do business, essentially. So what you're seeing now is a push to redefine how an employer views its relationships with the folks that care about its day-to-day activities. In some cases, you might have an independent contractor, but obviously these new pushes that we're seeing are to reclassify someone that we've said for years has been an independent contractor as an employee. And obviously that requires the employer to begin paying taxes on behalf, provide benefits, things of that nature.
Oh, now this is, just the tip of the iceberg here, correct? In that I would imagine that if indeed a lot of this does go through, that many drivers out there may not be able to survive this switch. Economically speaking, is that an accurate statement?
Well, it's hard to say what the total, what the end game would be. I think that short term there will be some massive negative effects in terms of how it affects certain types of drivers. If you have several trucks that are that you own, you say you've got 5 or 6 trucks that work for you. Suddenly now you're going to have to begin to pay those folks. They can't just lease the tractor. You can't handle things like that anymore. You're going to have to start paying payroll taxes and things of that nature. But more specifically, if you are, for instance, under the New York law, if you are an independent contractor that provides services to one primary client, and that client retains any type of authority to tell you what type of equipment you have to do, any type of authority to tell you how you perform your job, there is a very likely argument that will be made to say that you're no longer an independent contractor. You are, in fact, an employee. Now, the push in New York is to bolster the tax base. They hope to gain a little over $4 billion worth of tax revenue for this, but they're also attempting to bolster some of the, the union membership and some things of that nature. It's a very interesting policy play, but it has some serious ramifications for the trucking industry.
All right, and take that a step further, too, and this is being looked at, like I was mentioning at the beginning of the program, by a lot of other different states. I mean, are the states so strapped for money at this point? Are they looking for any available coin they can find? Is that what's behind all of this?
Yeah, I mean, you look at states like California that have been, running in the red for years, and they're scratching the bottom of the barrel in terms of how they're going to pay their bills, pay their teachers, and things of that nature. So anything they can do to increase their tax base, they're going to.
Okay, so this means that drivers and companies need to be ready for this kind of a thing. Peyton, I'm going to break here for just a couple of minutes. And drivers, I want you to weigh in on this topic at 8888 Road Dog. Think about this question, drivers, as they go into the break here. What would this do to your operation? Say, for example, that all of this does indeed go through, like in New York, for example, and you are coming into the state to do business. How would this impact you? I mean, if all of a sudden you're an independent owner-operator and then you're changed to an employee status out there, would that change your dynamic as far as your operating structure is concerned? I would imagine that this has got to have a negative impact on a lot of trucking companies out there as far as, moving freight. Is it going to be profitable to do business out there with the state that's got these kind of parameters in play? I'll bring that up with Peyton when we come back. Drivers, again, the phone number, it's 8888 Road Dog right here, Sirius XM 128.
news and issues affecting drivers. Now, back to SiriusXM Road Dog Trucking News.
Hey, drivers, welcome back. It is 16 minutes after. I'm Mark Billis, and the phone number is 8888 Road Dog. We're talking about some big changes on the horizon in some states as far as employee versus owner-operator status out there. And if all of this does indeed go through, in some states, drivers, it is a game changer. No question about that. And Peyton Inge is on with me to talk about this and how it could have some ramifications of what's going on in the trucking industry out there. And Peyton, again, I appreciate you joining the drivers to talk about this. Like you mentioned, this is big on the radar screens. Drivers indeed better be up to speed on this thing, right? Because it could impact the way that they do business and ultimately the way that they make their livelihood.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think where you're going to see the first impact is, the folks that, have a couple of independent contractors working for them. Maybe they're subcontracting out loads, things of that nature. I think that's where it's going to have the biggest impact right off the bat. And then as you see, states like New York begin to push more aggressively to enforce their new law, there's some pretty serious implications there if you get it wrong. If you think, hey, this guy's been running as an independent contractor for me for 5, 10, 12 years, no problem. This law, it's just something on the books, nothing's going to change. Well, if you get audited, it would change. There's even the potential for criminal penalties in some instances.
From that standpoint, I mean, that should automatically set off alarm bells. I mean, with drivers and companies out there about being up to speed with all of the material that is associated with this. I've heard the debate going on that this has really been a big push on the part of organized labor. And I'll set this up for you. I did an interview with a gentleman from the Minnesota Trucking Association. This was about 3 weeks ago, John Housladen. And the MTA has put out a series of videos defending the independent contractor model. And the MTA is alleging that this is really an effort by organized labor to make this push. Have you seen any research to that effect that might back that up? Is this really a push by organized labor to get involved here?
Well, I'm not sure about the push, but if you look at, for instance, the way the New York law was written and some of the comments that were made in support of the bill before it was passed, it's pretty clear that one of the primary goals of this is to bolster organized labor. And, I mean, let's face it, organized labor is big business, and it's where you get a lot of your political campaigns and or contributions and things of that nature. So it makes sense, but, in terms of what they invested in this particular law or in this particular pursuit, I couldn't say. I haven't seen any statistics on that. I'm not aware of anybody having done any research. But if you look at even some of the text that's included in the New York law, it's pretty clear that hey, look, we're passing this so the employer has to permit the people that are performing these services for him certain benefits, including the right to join a union. And wherever you fall on the side of pro-union, anti-union, whatever, it's definitely it's unique to see a tax law make such a broad statement and be so opinionated about union membership.
And this, I would imagine, has got to be a very attractive option for state lawmakers because does it avoid that tricky question out there, should we raise the state fuel tax? That political hot potato has been kicked down the road so many times before. Is this just a way for lawmakers to just kind of say, hey, I did my job, we're trying to raise revenue, but staying away from that very tricky subject of raising the fuel tax?
Well, it certainly could be. My thought is that in this day and time, any opportunity to raise taxes and or generate revenue is going to be looked at pretty aggressively. And on the Department of Labor and labor side, we have in place some rules at the federal level that are so aggressive that if an employer gets it wrong, it can cost them 10 to 15 times easily what the actual amount in dispute was between the employer and employee. So it makes sense for a state that is looking for money to begin to reevaluate how they tax people and try and reevaluate the differences between an employee and this independent contractor, because you do see a pretty significant disparity in revenue that gets generated by the state when you classify an individual employee versus an independent contractor.
Do you think this may have a negative effect on business in the state, though? Because, I mean, if one company does a lot of business, say, for example, in the state of California, and the dynamics change, where now there's additional taxation that's going to come into play here, that some companies may say, you know, we're just not going to do business in that state that embraces these kind of laws that change the employment dynamic. From a business perspective, what is your gut feeling tell you about as far as driving business away?
Well, my gut feeling is that businesses are smart, and they do everything they can to avoid taxes, and that ultimately benefits people because it creates jobs. And you look at what the state of Maryland did a few years ago when they added a tax to all folks with an income of, I believe, in excess of $1 million. Suddenly these millionaires are being taxed more than they were the previous year. Mm-hmm. And so while they anticipated generating a significant amount of additional revenue, by the following year they had not only lost people, but they had lost the people they counted on to develop these jobs. So in terms of where this particular law or this particular push will go, I think it will ultimately hurt your big businesses, but it will force businesses that are relying as their business model on independent contractors to provide those services to carefully look at how they do it. And the way the law, like for instance in New York, is written, you can argue that even a bill of lading or a manifest is an attempt to exercise control over the delivery of that good or of that cargo, which means technically you could be classified as an employee rather than just an independent contractor simply because you picked up a load of freight and you have that bill of lading in your possession and it says transport at 10 degrees. So it's because of the teeth that the states are using, it has huge ramifications.
And take that a step further too. I mean, the numbers have got to come from somewhere. Is this law pretty much going to be based on the fact that the shippers are going to be doing some of the reporting back to the state as to the type of drivers that are coming in, employee versus independent contractor? Is that kind of the wild card in this whole thing, that the shippers are going to be the ones reporting all this?
Well, for instance, you look at the reporting that has been done on it, and to be honest with you, I think it's relatively biased in favor of the Department of Labor and in favor of those types of you must be an employee policies. We're going to push this. You have to be an employee. We're going to push the increase of certain minimum wages, things of that nature. It's an attempt to redistribute and change how we're doing things. So, but in terms of the actual number, it's hard to say because I don't think there's been a whole lot of research done that's directed specifically at the transportation industry. The way the Department of Labor typically acts is they will go in and they will audit a specific, we'll call it an item or a person of interest. So they may pick one company and go in and audit it, and they'll say, hey, look, we'll just pick a random name here, XYZ shipping company are using 100 different trucks or independent contractors to transport your freight, and you're a freight broker, but well, technically we might be able to argue that if you're doing all this for one business that these folks are not independent contractors. They are, in fact, employees. And it gets pretty rough. You look at companies that broker their own freight that are using independent contractors, it becomes very problematic.
Okay, and you mentioned there might be bias in this. I mean, to me, that sounds like that's going to open up some possibilities for court challenges. Do you expect that to be some of the things that will be the determining factor going forward? Will this stand a court challenge going forward?
Well, looking at New York's law, for instance, I would not think that would sustain a federal court challenge simply because the impact is going to be on interstate commerce as opposed to just New York law. You're no longer technically taxing people just passing through or your state residents. You're attempting to change and control the behavior of entities located across the rest of the country. So I don't believe that the New York law would sustain a federal challenge. The Department of Labor's issues are a little bit different, and it remains to see how that actually will play out in terms of how they choose to enforce it. They will come up with little policies and procedures, and then it's those policies and procedures that are ultimately challenged in many instances.
Okay, and I know the compliance date now for New York is April the 10th, and it was postponed slightly by some amendments made by the state legislature after the governor signed a bill and then sent it back for some of the changes. So, based on that, is this pretty much a foregone conclusion that I guess pending any last minute court action, this is actually going to go? This will actually go into effect in New York State coming up on April the 10th, if I'm reading this right.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. I would not expect New York to suddenly change its mind. I mean, they've been pretty active in terms of legislation over the last year and a half or so. It'll take people voting to actually change something.
Okay. Do you anticipate that there may be political fallout from this? Because I would imagine some candidates that indeed have expressed their favoritism for this may experience, I guess, backlash, or is that, I guess, too early to tell at this point at what sort of political fallout may happen?
Well, anytime you look at prospective backlash, you have to figure out, what that backlash would be and where it would come from. In this instance, we think that we've got, 40,000 people that are involved in the transportation industry that are in the state of New York that have been improperly classified. That's if you believe some of the numbers that are out there. So as many as 40,000 that are misclassified. It doesn't seem like it's a huge percentage of the population that's going to stand up and complain. And you look at New York, and they derive such a large percentage of their political support through, pro-union supporters. It's hard to see where they would suffer any immediate backlash. But at the same time, if this becomes an issue that's affecting big business outside of the state of New York, then I think that you'd see a very quick court battle going on over something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot yet to be decided out there. I'm reading a quote from Governor Cuomo. He says, quoting, "The major stakeholders representing both the trucking industry and labor have urged me to sign this bill in order to bring clarity to this area of the law." And again, quoting, "Nevertheless, I was concerned that certain technical issues of the legislation resulted in a test that did not address the independent contractor issues in the trucking industry in a fair and a consistent manner." Now, just right down the road, New Jersey is also looking at something very similar. The governor just recently, drivers, had vetoed a measure that would have changed the dynamics with this, but apparently it is indeed starting to come back to the table in the state of New Jersey. It's coming back for a visit in New Jersey. Both legislative chambers are considering duplicate bills that would prohibit owner-operators from port and parcel delivery service because of that classification. That same bill was vetoed last year by Governor Christie after it was narrowly cleared from the legislature. And we're going to break here for just a couple of minutes and continue on with the conversation. And if you got a question for Attorney Peyton, Inge, drivers, you better call us. It's 8888 Road Dog. We're talking about the changing of the dynamics in some of the states when it comes to owner-operators versus employee status. And as you've heard, it drilling down into it, it all evolves around the dollars, generating more tax revenue out there. Are you concerned, for example, that if you do business, say, in one of these states that have this law in effect, that it would change your classification? How would something like this impact you? And if you got a question about it, we've got the answers. Don't go anyplace. More coming up at the bottom of the hour right here on Sirius XM 128.
This is Road Dog Trucking News. Join the show by calling 8888 Road Dog.
Drivers, during this 2-hour segment, 2 to 4 Eastern Time, I bring you the latest news, traffic, weather information. It's all about the news here on this portion of Sirius XM's Road Dog Trucking Channel, 2 to 4 Eastern Time. And we're talking about a very timely news story out there, drivers. It could indeed change the way that you do business out there with some states. A lot of states are considering legislation that would change the dynamics of independent contractors and the people that work for them and change them to an employee status, meaning that more tax revenue is going to be generated in the form of, the FICA, the state taxes and all of that. And Attorney Peyton Inge is talking about this and about the widespread reach that this story has. It's going to impact a lot of drivers in many, many states out there. And if it's not being talked about in your state right now, drivers, it will be at some point because every state is looking for additional revenue out there. How would all of this impact your particular business? Would you stop doing business with a particular state, for example, if, for example, they put in those changes in the law that creates a shift in the independent contractor status to employee? 8888 Road Dog. First, though, these top stories brought to you by Schneider National. They're developing the electronic logging device mandate rule this go-around. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration had to include provisions to properly ensure the devices could not be used as a tool for carriers to harass drivers. The agency unveiled the ELD mandate rule March 13th. Now, driver harassment was the deciding factor in the derailment of the last rule, which mandated electronic onboard recorders, as a federal court vacated the rule in its entirety because it had not properly safeguarded drivers from the potential harassment out there. Congress also stepped in with the MAP 21 Highway Funding Act from 2012. The law dictated that an ELD mandate come within a year of the law being enacted, but it also directed the agency to develop measures to prevent drivers from being harassed with those devices. I've got this story up on Facebook if you want to weigh in at SiriusXM's Road Dog Trucking News. In Vancouver, there will be no immediate end to a truckers' strike that has crippled operations in Vancouver area ports for weeks now after weekend talks between the government and drivers failed to make any kind of progress. Manny DeSange, who represents more than 1,000 non-union truckers, said government leaders are unwilling to negotiate during their meeting late Sunday night. He said, quoting, "We are at a stalemate." He added again, quote, "They do not want to talk to us at this time. It is basically a take it or leave it deal." The Michigan Department of Transportation is spending $20 million to reconstruct 4 miles of US 127, according to Mark Rizzoli, Transportation Services Director for MDOT. It is a total rebuild of that freeway. Starting next month, crews from the Interstate Highway Construction Zone in the Michigan area will rebuild 4 miles of US 127 between Parnell Road and Henry Road north of the city of Jackson. Drivers, that's the news. And again, it's 8888 Road Dog. Love to get your input on this story, drivers. And again, it's talking about the change that may be coming in the employment status of a lot of you guys out there, because many states are considering laws, indeed, that would change the owner-operator, independent driver, in other words, the independent contractor model, to an employee. And Attorney Peyton Inge is breaking all of it down for us and what some of the ramifications that might come up in all of this. And again, Peyton, I thank you for joining me on the show and talking about the drivers. Now, like I mentioned before going into the break, that New Jersey apparently is going to be bringing this thing back, because I'm reading some material that indicates both legislative chambers are considering duplicate bills that would prohibit the owner-operators from port and parcel delivery services. This is one of the main components here about dealing with the employment classification at the ports. In other words, could more revenue be generated from the port drivers if the employment classification is changed?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You're talking about a revenue issue, but that case, I don't see how that would survive a federal court challenge. Okay. I'm not as familiar with the exact provisions of that statute. I know it's been kicked around, as you mentioned, for 4 or 5 years on different levels, but I don't believe a state can prohibit an individual from participating in business in most instances. So it would be very unfortunate if New Jersey were to enact that statute, but I would not expect it to survive a legal challenge.
And from that standpoint, go into that a little bit further, because how would you set that up? In other words, if you were the attorney that was assigned to that case, would there be certain procedures you would outline? What would be the school of thought, I guess, in maybe defending a case like that? What would you be looking at?
Well, defending it from the side of a independent contractor who performs parcel service?
Yes, correct.
Okay, well, the first thing I'd look at is I would say, you're depriving me of my ability to attain a livelihood simply because I am not an employee of someone. I work for myself, and I am a small business owner, and by God, that's what this country was founded on. And I would start with that premise. I'd take a real close look at what the statute says when it's actually passed. the effect would be pretty clear. But then I'd go talk to, a New Jersey attorney, somebody like that does, some appellate or some federal work, and I would start with that as a base, because you can't simply rule out an entire section of the population from performing a service simply because they choose to work for themselves as opposed to working for a company. I've been truly never run into anything like that, and it's sad that we're in such a state that folks are actually considering that. Elected officials are actually considering that as an option.
And from that standpoint, though, I mean, that does give maybe the person involved at least a legal framework that maybe they could appeal something like that. And I'm reading here that, like, for example, in New Jersey, when this thing came up, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, the American Trucking Association opposed the legislation. The governor, again, vetoed it because of some of the language in it. But, again, it's apparently coming back. Is that going to be one of the keys in your estimation, is that there's got to be big groups getting behind, measures to prevent these changes like OWIDA, the American Trucking Association? How critical is the support from these organizations?
Well, it's extremely critical. I mean, at the end of the day, it takes concerted action or and money to fund a legal battle or to contact your elected representatives and to let them know how you, as their voter base, feels about actions like this. Because at the end of the day, it costs small business millions and millions of dollars. But in terms of groups of people taking a stand and saying, "Hey, look, this isn't going to work for X, Y, and Z reasons," it's incredibly critical. Now, this particular law, I would be quite surprised if Governor Christie, signs it. He's relatively pro-business, so it has to make it, cross his desk or be overruled, or I should say, voted over his veto, but I would not really expect him to sign that. But like I said, I think it's unfortunate that we've seen that it's even a factor.
Yeah, absolutely. And from an additional standpoint, do you think there might be other types of industries that might be in this same economic crosshair, so to speak? I can't imagine this just being limited to, say, the trucking industry. I mean, this could have wide-ranging implications for many industries, I would imagine, that deal with independent contractors. Is that a fair statement in your estimation?
Oh, absolutely. And obviously, New York has the law that's directed specifically at the transportation industry.
Yeah.
But with respect to the Department of Labor and their recent push in the last 4 or 5 years to reclassify certain categories of people, more specifically independent contractors, as employees, that has huge implications. You see it everywhere from piano businesses that rely on independent contractors to teach at schools in different states to the trucking industry. It's a problem that affects everyone, and like I said, it's a move to force people to work for someone else and force those employers to begin paying those taxes as opposed to letting the independent contractor pay their bills and then take their income from what's left and basically build their own version of the American dream by working for themselves.
Yeah, and that would be, I guess, one of the issues that would be used in a court challenge, right? I mean, depriving somebody of the chance to live that American dream. Would that be one of the components that could be used in court, so to speak?
Well, more or less. I mean, you'd have to find some legal terms for it, but with the New Jersey issue, absolutely, because you have an entire segment of the population that is being eliminated as to who can or can't perform certain job functions. And that would be, in my mind, a huge legal battle because you can't simply legislate someone's business and require them effectively to either become an employee, a statutory employee, or go find a new, go find a new place to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the states that are looking at this, goodness sakes, drivers, in case you're not aware, Georgia is looking at stuff like this. We talked about Washington about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and Washington senators referred the Employee Fair Classification Act to committee February the 18th after House members passed it by a 51-45 vote. The bill would define independent contractors and impose civil penalties and damages. The State Trucking Association and other opponents said it would classify most workers as employees, regardless of what the parties involved may say. California, looking at it in the courts, a California judge has declined a ruling on an issue in a trucker class action suit over classification. The California truckers have about 30 days to file an amended complaint after a state superior court judge declined to rule on the legality of their signed waivers back on February the 18th. The Idaho Supreme Court has concluded operating under the authority of a carrier's DOT number is not considered sufficient to eliminate an owner-operator from IC status. In a case involving Western Home Transport versus the state of Idaho, the state's highest court overturned a previous decision that allowed the state's labor department to use operating under a company's authority as a standalone determination of employment status. And Peyton, I've got to imagine that with this long list of states that are taking action already, gearing up, trying to get these changes implemented, every single state's got to be looking at this point, right?
It's hard to say. It certainly it just goes back to when times are tough. The tax man is definite. He's the busiest guy out there. So I would expect more states to take a pretty close look at it, depending on what their state worker laws currently look like.
Okay, so again, it just is going to depend. But I think, though, it's something that, would you say, it's safe to say that those in the trucking industry maybe need to bring this to the front burner to see how it may impact them at some point?
Well, absolutely. In the trucking industry, because so many of of our drivers are independent contractors, it really does affect how we do business. Because the old method of obtaining loads and things like that is kind of we've seen a shift in the last 10 to 20 years, and you're seeing now very, very, very large trucking companies spring up. But for the independent contractor that's still trying to make a living, and this has huge implications for them.
Yeah, okay. I'm reading from Facebook. A gentleman by the name of Phil just wrote in. He says, regarding this story, he says it's only the Woodrow Wilson leftists who are the most concerned about human classification. He says the Democrats who are strapped for votes. Then he goes on into some additional comments out there. But this really doesn't cross any political line, does it? I mean, is this kind of something both sides are looking at, Republican and Democrat, as a way to generate revenue?
Well, you don't find many Republican union members.
Okay.
But be that as it may, when it comes to the Department of Labor, it's hard to find a Republican that pushes, Department of Labor policies. I'm sure there are exceptions, but I'm not aware of any personally, simply because what the Department of Labor tries to do is, instead of fostering business, it finds ways to increase the cost of business. And like I said, it's kind of a recent phenomenon, last 5-6 years, where you've seen just massive pushes by different people. But it really is unfortunate, because you see industries, like the truck industry, that will be caught in the crosshairs pretty quick.
All right, I got a break here for a few more minutes, and drivers, if you've got a question for Peyton, jump in. I've only got him for a few more minutes, and I'm going to let him go on to the rest of his day. And again, it's 8888 Road Dog. Great observations, guys, and thank you to everybody writing in on Facebook about this. I've got this topic posted up on the Facebook site, SiriusXM's Road Dog Trucking News. Guys, as you can tell, there's a lot of twists and turns with this story here, but it is one that you do need to put up on your radar screen, because it could be coming very soon to a state nearest you. Back in a few minutes right here on SiriusXM 128.
The news and issues affecting drivers. Now, back to SiriusXM Road Dog Trucking News.
Hey, guys, just a couple of minutes left with attorney Peyton Inge, and he's got to get back to court. And I thank him for joining me here on the program to talk about this very controversial story. It is a story that drivers, a lot of states are looking at as far as, how you guys are classified out there on the road, from employee versus independent contractor out there. The Minnesota Trucking Association, as a matter of fact, in direct response to this, has put up a series of videos up on their website talking about the benefits of being an independent contractor versus an employee. And I had John Houselayton on the program about 2 weeks ago, and he talked about, the fact that organized labor is trying to change the dynamics in the state of Minnesota to have more of the workers classified as employees, thus threatening the independent contractor model as you guys know it out there today. You can go to John's website, by the way. I'll post that up on Facebook, Indeed, if you want to check out some of those videos that the Minnesota Trucking Association has put together. Peyton, obviously a lot of emotion with this story, and I think that this is why drivers need to really, get up to speed on this and, find out how this may indeed impact them if it does come down the pike. New Jersey's got this on the list. New York State's got this on the list. Minnesota is looking at it as well. Washington State has got this. How do drivers out there maybe change some of the dynamics if they feel passionately about this subject, about, maybe fighting that switch over from IC to employee? Do they need to get a hold of their state lawmakers? Should they contact their federal lawmakers? Where would you recommend they go to let their voices be known?
Well, the fastest way to make your voice heard is to contact your state representative, whether it's picking up the phone or calling, sending letters, what have you, however that elected official receives constituents' comments. In terms of the federal folks, absolutely same deal, just fax them, send them a letter. I think where you're going to see the hardest push is at the state level, because we were talking about, some of these states desperately need money, and they're looking to do anything they can to increase tax revenue.
Okay,
go ahead.
I was going to say, but based on that scenario, though, based on all of the components out there, from what you've been able to gather, I mean, it sounds like this could be challenged in courts, where where somebody could present a case that their livelihood may be threatened, in quotes, the American dream could be upset, that kind of a thing. But at least, if anything, there might be a legal basis to try to fight this.
Absolutely, and that's where your membership in the various trucking organizations that are out there becomes instrumental, because as a collective you have a voice, and if you let the folks at your trucking association know how you feel about a particular law. They have the ability to also call and make complaints and to raise your concern to your fellow truckers out there, because at the end of the day, trucks do make this country go round in terms of what is delivered, and people ought to think pretty carefully about messing with the money those folks earn.
Okay, I appreciate you really getting into a lot of detail with this, and I think this has really been a tremendous help for the drivers out there to understand the complexities of the subject matter. And drivers, it is important that you do read up on this. And Peyton, you handle stuff like this all the time. Tell folks where drivers can find you. You help represent trucking companies that need legal assistance.
Yeah, sure. We do a lot of trucking defense, anything from cargo claims to property to defending a case when a trucker has an issue with another trucker, small car, and they've been sued. But you can find us on the web, just chambleeryan.com, CHAMBLEE Ryan RYAN.com, and we act as national counsel for trucking entities all across the country. So what we do is, if you have a court case or something that's going to court, whether it's L.A. or New York, we find somebody to handle the day-to-day stuff. We call them the local lawyer, and then we come in, and if we have to, we'll try the case and do a pretty good job for you.
All right, outstanding. Send me all the web links, and I'll get you back again on the radio soon. I appreciate you joining me for a little bit talking about this case. And drivers, again, that is attorney Peyton Inge.